Welcome to Arizona State University and the Center for Services Leadership. My name is Thomas Hollmann. I am the Executive Director for the Center. Our guest on this edition of A Conversation With is Lee Scanzano. Lee was Vice President Customer Care at Cox Communications. She is a leader in the services discipline, a very good friend of the Center, and was also recently the chair of the board for the Center as well. And we had a slight technical hiccup at the beginning, so thank you everybody for sticking with us. Lee, thank you for joining me on our webinar.
Oh, absolutely my honor and my pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. And staying on the topic of technical things, technical notes, very briefly, if you have a question, please send it to Grace. Grace, our student worker, is the co-host on this edition. Open the chat and send a question to Grace, and we will be able to answer that. If you're listening by phone, you won't be able to do that, but you can enter a second window by a PC and then send a question. We are recording, so if you have technical issues at any point, you can rejoin, and you can also then see what you missed on the posting that will follow after the webinar on our YouTube channel. All right, with that now and with the technology all sorted out, Lee, thank you again for joining me, and I'd like to start by learning a bit about you. Let's start at the very beginning. Where did you grow up?
Wow, very beginning seems a very long time ago. I was born in Brooklyn and raised in the Bronx, so I am a New Yorker through and through. Educated also in the Bronx and attended Herbert Lehman College, which was at that point part of CUNY. And when I went to school, when I look back, I was also working full-time as well at a bank. So I think that was part of the reason when I sort of discovered that I loved working with customers and really enjoyed my time at the bank. I did leave school early, so did not complete my degree there, and then went on to pursue a career in service.
Thank you for doing that so that we can have the chance to talk to you about it today. So please talk about the beginnings of your career. Where and how did you get started before Cox?
Do you know, my first official assignment, I worked at an entrepreneurial business in downtown Manhattan, a travel agency, where I learned everything about the travel business. Pre-computers. We did a lot by hand then. And I found that the skills that I learned there wound up being very attractive to a large company that happened to be hiring in New York called American Express. So when I went, the fact that I could hand do a worldwide itinerary and price that was very, very attractive at the time. So I joined American Express in their travel management business and quickly discovered that dealing face-to-face with customers, we were on Wall Street as well, and servicing corporate customers, as well as working with people, would quickly become a calling for me. About a year and a half later, took on a leadership assignment, and that really was the beginning of my lifelong fascination with leading people and leadership, specifically services leadership.
That's great. So you stayed at Amex for a while, and then from there, how did you end up at Cox?
Well, I was with American Express for about 14 to 15 years in New York, and then moved with the company to Arizona and joined the Corporate Card Center. Was with American Express about 20 years, and then physically relocated to the Bay Area where I joined the Thompson Group. And it was the first time in my career still running operations and service, but in a different industry, out of financial services and into information services. Relocated to Michigan with Thompson, And then with the next assignment, after we consolidated operations, decided that I would come back to Arizona. We fell in love with Arizona, myself and my family. And at that point, I joined Bank One, which would become JP Morgan Chase shortly after, and then was recruited to the company that I would spend the next 20 years of my career with, Cox Communications.
That's great. Great journey. Great companies.
Yes.
Different states. I'll maybe talk about that in a second as well. So you had a long career at Cox. So can you take us briefly on an overview journey of that career development at Cox?
Well, when I joined the company, it was, for me, in the beginning, it was less about the industry and telecommunications and more about joining a very special leader and someone that intrigued me and invited me to be part of a transformational process that he was building. And it was all about recruiting a team of people that would not only work together to grow the company, but would lift what we were doing and accomplish great things. So I left the bank, Bank One. I was there just shy of a year and was very, very intrigued about this opportunity to be part of the senior team with Cox here in Arizona. And it was less about my responsibilities changing over time. The business was evolving. We became a statewide business and then organized nationally. And in a wonderful industry that brought lots and lots of change to products and the services that we deliver to customers.
Lots of interesting things going on in the telecommunications industry in that time.
For sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Very briefly, before we talk more about Cox and your experience there, you joined the board of the Center for Service Leadership in 2006, so you had been with us for quite a while. Tell me a bit about how you became involved with the center and your experience with us.
Well, at that point in time, our general manager was assigned to the board, and he had, it was very challenging for his schedule to really engage. And as he learned more about the center, and the purpose of the center, he talked to me very early on about the fact that not only my fascination with marketing and business, but he thought that this would be a perfect fit. You mentioned developmental opportunity. That's always how I have viewed my interaction and my engagement with the center. In fact, I would note it on my individual development plan on an annual basis. The opportunity to listen and learn from others at the board, it's very unique. The interaction between academia and businesses, I think it's magic.
Well, we certainly hope and feel so. So thank you for that. Before I get into Cox some more, you mentioned you had been in different states in the U.S., so New York, Arizona, Bay Area, Michigan, so different parts of the country for sure. Did you see any differences in how each state looks at services? Or they always the sort of stereotypical ideas about how New Yorkers are and how people from California are and so on. Is that something you experienced in the business as well?
Do you know, I have to say yes and no. In service, really, it all comes down to recruiting and drawing the right talent. And over time, whether, especially in services, most of the operations that I ran, I was able to recruit talent across different markets. So having a profile for the person that had a passion for customers and had the right qualities for how to interact with customers, either in a digital world or in many operations face-to-face. There were several times in my career where we had offices that we set up on site within the customer premise. And that became just critical, very critical, that you hire the right people that could mesh with the company's culture, but also represent the firm and deliver the level of service. So, at the end of the day, whether you're sitting in New York or in Michigan or in the Bay Area, having that right profile and having that person that was suited and really understood what it is to serve. And honestly, I think that is an honor to interact with a customer and put the best foot forward for the company that you're representing. Mm-hmm. So that is something when I interview people and we select people for these roles, we look for those. It's kind of the intangible sort of things. Right. You can teach skills, absolutely. I think it was American Airlines many years ago that we couldn't teach Mary to be nice. Mm-hmm. But that's what you look for. You look for that intangible.
Right, great.
I hope I answered that.
Yeah, I was just curious because you had really coast to coast and in between. So a very interesting experience. At this point, I want to again remind you, if you're having a question, please go into your chat and send a note to Grace as co-host. Before we go into sort of your Cox experience, I want to maybe have a look at Grace and see what the first question from the online chat is. So Grace, please go ahead. What's our first question if we have a question?
Yeah, the question from the audience is, we are still having trouble filling jobs. It has gotten a little better. Please talk about how to find excellent frontline employees.
Okay, right on the heels of your answer there about hiring people.
Yeah.
We've had certainly a number of years where people had a lot of trouble finding employees, period, and finding employees that fit as well. So just kind of following up what you just said, I guess, talk a little bit more about how you find the excellent employees.
Okay. Where my mind goes first is you've built an organization and you have existing talent that hopefully is a good fit for your position. Utilize that resource. I think so often, sometimes we forget about that, but I think most large companies these days do go first to their employee base to say, do you have referrals? Depending on the guidelines within the company, friends and family can be good sources of referrals. Developing programs not only with university counterparts, within the market or the markets that you are hiring in, but also more and more with high schools, so that high school students begin to think about the types of careers in services, whether they want to pursue an interest in finance, most people, supply chain, marketing, I don't think you can start early enough, probably juniors and seniors in high school, another great source for candidates to just think about. And then working with a professional staffing firm that may be able to work with you to identify possibly other companies that may be releasing employees that could be a good fit for roles. Have done all of those things at different times.
Casting a wide net,
yes.
Really, and rather than
absolutely
focusing just on, say, who's graduating from the local college right now, casting a much wider net to think about it, but casting also a net that's much more direct and personal in a way, than just
Yes.
posting something on a LinkedIn or Indeed or someplace there.
Yes.
So very, very interesting. So let's talk a little bit more now about the leadership and leadership of frontline people you already mentioned, and you used kind of the term developing others a number of times. Can you talk a little bit more about how to approach that? How do you develop others? Depending on what job it is, of course, this will differ, but folks that are on the customer service side, frontline folks, and beyond, how do you develop others? How do you lead a team to develop others?
How? That's a very broad question. To me, development starts with something very simple in a way. Simple to say, but sometimes hard to do, and that's developing trust with people. So critical. Whether you are skip leveling, your responsibility is to develop your direct report team, but very often as a senior leader, we all know that we are skip leveling. If you're a vice president, you're working with your directors, but very often I would be mentoring and coaching our managers or meeting with our frontline employees as they come through the door. And I think it's important, especially for the workforce today, to make that a priority. I hear over and over here at the business school that development and growth is something that people entering and selecting companies these days want to make sure is a priority for the company that they're joining. That there are not only formalized programs that they can take a part of, but that the leadership within the company takes the time to listen and add that personal touch.
Right.
Where business is personal.
ASU tagline right here.
You know, you can't kind of invent caring. I think it means a lot to people when you're not only putting them into classes for them to expand their skills, but taking an interest in them as human beings.
That's a great overview. Leadership, certainly of the employee side, so this is one tricky challenge. But you also talked about leadership already with the sort of the customer side and serving customers. Can you expand on that a little bit in terms of what does leadership mean when it comes to serving customers?
You know, I for years, especially at American Express, part of the responsibility was to work with the customer in their environment. And when I joined the advisory board here at ASU, we talk a lot about co-creation with the customer. I think part of structuring a program or talking with customers about additional products and services, using the customer base as a listening post to understand not only how they are using the current sets of products and services, but where the needs in their business is going. That's the gold. So to me, a good program, very similar to the advisory board that we have here at ASU, setting up a customer advisory board. We have several of the members here at ASU that have done that within their own firms. I think that's an excellent way to keep in touch and use those customers, your customer base, as a sounding board. And also making sure that you involve the right disciplines across the business. Not only the customer service or customer care people, but your marketing colleagues, your finance colleagues, your people in supply chain, making sure that there's a much more holistic approach to how we're interacting with customers at all levels.
You had mentioned to me, not today, but earlier as well, that you almost think of that role you have, leadership of people, but also that through that you're developing a brand of the organization. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think something that we learn at the center, and you experience throughout your career, that when you're representing a company, there are different components of the brand of that company that do overlap with the purpose of the company, the values of the company. But that brand, especially in service, I think is critical. That every person from the senior leadership down to the frontline person, the new hires entering the door, need to understand that the most important, and I feel very passionate about this when I ask people, what do you think the most valuable asset is to the company? Often people talk about the technologies that are in place, the products, the services, the network, and yes, our employees as well. But rarely do I get the answer that says, the one I believe in my heart to be true, the most important asset is the customer base. That can't be replicated easily. And to make sure that you're retaining customers and growing your existing relationships, you've got to be creating great experiences.
That's a great point. The sort of topic of brand or brand management is often one that people think of as a marketing problem, right? But it really is not. It's really,
No.
really more, like you said, everybody's problem.
You mentioned the people challenge. We call it sort of building that bridge. So here's the brand promise of the company. The leadership challenge is helping every person in that company understand how they connect, that bridge, that their direct contribution to that brand. I think that retains people as well.
That's right. It's kind of the sense of purpose that comes from that.
Yes.
Very much so. Yeah. My background is marketing, right? I'm teaching marketing and researching marketing, and so I'm very familiar with the notion of branding. As even within marketing, there's people that say, "Oh, it's really only this group that takes care of the brand," and it really isn't. It's really everybody's job, and can not only be their job, but also a reason for them to get really excited about the company.
Absolutely.
Very
Get
good
up in
point.
the morning and
Be part of something. You taught as sort of almost like the customers are really the most important assets. How do you develop that asset? How do you create loyal customers? How does that work?
It starts with that brand and the promise, and right up front in the initial sales process, setting up the right expectations with the customer, and then working throughout the organization to make sure that everyone that interacts with the customer understands what's been promised, and as we just talked about, gets up every day. But people, in order to get people excited about delivering on that promise, they have to know that their contributions matter and make a difference. But I think how is through people. You've got to make sure, and in a very hands-on sense, that not only people understand what needs to be delivered, but then they're recognized for adding their contributions and bringing that brand to the next level. But for me, it's always been about something very basic: contribution, making sure that your voice matters. So at the end of the year, when we're celebrating the financial result, you're building that bridge again. Here's how what we did within our operation helped the company to be successful.
That is so important. Also, so challenging to a lot of people to make that connection between each individual and the results that everybody has on the big board, and you can see all the numbers and everything. And how does each person relate to that in a way that is meaningful to them?
It's the responsibility of every leader to do that.
Great point. I want to follow up on another thing you mentioned a couple of times: technology. But before I do, I want to actually see for our next question from online. Grace, do we have a question?
Yeah, the question is, can you please talk about the tension between customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction?
So that's a great question. So we just talked about developing employees, serving customers. Often they're seen as a tension. So how do you think about that?
I think the most basic thing is if you're dealing with the problem of high churn within a business, especially in an organization where you may be set up in a call center environment or you have operational teams. And we all know that high levels of churn not only cost the business financially, but there's an impact to the customer as well. So I think the very basics around the environment and the work environment that you're creating, I think we've talked a bit about that. Well, I want to make sure that I'm clear. Contribution, I think, is a basic human need. People want to join the group, even in a call center. And the reason I say that even because call center work, there isn't the freedom necessarily to move around. You're either at home or in an office and can tend to be repetitive. But making sure that every individual understands and really kind of gets a rush out of solving someone's problem and helping that customer get the very, very most out of the products and services that they have, and making that important every day. And then having the right recognition mechanisms in place. You're retaining a workforce that believes in your business and is going to help you get to the next level. And I think that at a very basic level, the more invested, I think the word that for me is overused these days, the higher the employee engagement level is, the higher customer satisfaction levels or your NPS scores. At the end of the day, retention of customers, those two things are should be directly correlated.
Right. So if you have the right people and you set up your organization in the right way, then there is no tension really between employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction, because employees, if I understand you right, the employees that are working on making customers satisfied will get, as you said, a rush out of it and will be feeling engaged and feeling behind the brand or part of the brand. So the two are moving in tandem in that way.
And I mentioned before contribution, making sure no organization is perfect, especially as we look at processes that impact customers. Everything from how we bring customers on, how they interact with the products and services, how we garner their feedback. But here's another way to make sure that the people that are face-to-face interacting or speaking with customers, at Cox, we made a very big deal of pulling people together on an ongoing basis to ask, what are we doing well? What do we need to continue? Tell us where the gaps are. And we used that direct feedback, and there were many people that either traveled to our centers or in an online environment from our marketing groups, from our product groups, from our network groups. That's how a lot of the improvements to the business were made. But in the beginning, as we learned that process, very, very powerful, making sure that as improvements were made, that we closed looped that and got the feedback back to the people that had told us where the gaps are. And that it was very uplifting and empowering to them to know that their voices were heard and they helped to improve the business.
Great.
And making sure that that closed loop happens is critical.
That's great. Great point. Let me get back to the technology side of things. Of course, technology is has always been, I guess, and is certainly in everybody's thoughts now with AI and what we get going on there. So in terms of the leadership and certainly employees and customers as well, but overall leadership and technology, how has that evolved, and how do you believe you need to evolve with it? Where's it all going?
Where is it all going? Here's where, for me, wearing a marketing hat is very, very important. And I have very strong feelings around technology is great. We all know that when you're controlling costs, implementing IVRs or AI, making sure that you're doing it carefully and in the right manner. How do you really do that? To me, it comes down to knowing your customer. One size in this area does not fit all. So eliminating the opportunity for someone to interact or possibly speak with someone, I believe is wrong. It may not be the first choice, if you will, because a majority of customers may not want to interact via phone and want to go online. But however you're doing that, making sure that there's no better way to learn a process than to do it yourself. Than to go through, utilize, and make sure that whatever technology you're putting in place that falls under that category of easy to do business with, that it works, that you're gathering feedback from, there's a mechanism for customers to provide you with ongoing feedback. But it all starts with knowing the customer segments. Who wants to adapt to a given technology and who doesn't? I think that's critical.
Great point. Kind of a customer-driven technology development as opposed to organizational-driven technology development.
Yeah, and utilizing possibly your product advisory boards, making sure that that's a diverse group of individuals that adequately represents the different segments across your customer base.
That's great, yeah. And just a brief note, none of today's conversation was developed by AI, so we're all good. So we've got that covered here. So far, still, right? So far, we're still good. We actually still need people to do all the understanding and talking and relationship development as well.
Yes, critical.
So we might have a conversation in 10 years and see where it's gone at that point. But for now, we're good. You mentioned a few times things like next level or transformational thing. Can you tell me a little bit more about the transformational mindset, how to get to a next level?
Had the privilege of being part of a team that put a stake in the ground and said, we don't want to be a team. We want to be, that's table stakes. We want to be a high-performing team that every member of that team, and there were 14 of us, we had each other's backs. If one person was struggling with their leadership, with their functional responsibilities, we each felt that it was our responsibility to step in and support that senior team member. But at the end of the day, it was a multi-year program where we got to know each other very, very well, developed the kind of trust that can be a rare thing in working in a corporate environment, where you feel that it's okay to be vulnerable, because in your vulnerability within leadership, that's how you grow. So it made it easier as a team and as individuals to take calculated risks, because I knew that my colleague in finance had my back. It was a rare experience, but you learn the components of leadership and to talk out loud about them, that there is no higher calling than to serve, serve your people, serve customers, and to serve each other as a team. That's what I meant by taking it to the next level.
Very interesting. Reminds me, in a previous life, I was working in industry and I was running the strategy process for a large financial services firm. And one of the things I did is we had a half day where we had the CFO became the head of HR. The chief marketing officer became the CFO, right? So had everybody take on that role, and for a half day they had to be in that role, and that was maybe the most powerful exercise we ever did, exactly along those lines of trying to figure out that we're all thinking about the customer all the time, but we're not as often thinking about it from the perspective of this or that group within the company. That's a very interesting idea.
So there's a customer problem happening. Generally, it was as the customer service or customer care senior leader, I was going to jump in and own that. There were some times that the functional responsibility did not even impact that customer issue. But what this process in transformational leadership you become very, very aware of is everyone, the marketing colleague, the finance colleague, or my field counterpart, meaning our field service leader, we all came together and owned a piece of that. So the problem solving, the process improvement, and at the end of the day, the positive impact to growth, we all own that together. Those are some of my best memories. That was not the only single point in time, but it's those components of leadership that really have been the calling for me. Being part of that team, that's always been the rush for me.
So the question of each organization has multiple functions. How do you, what is the multifunctional nature of the organization that works best? So you're kind of describing that it has to be that sort of mixing together of the perspectives. And all the components that make up inclusion, diversity, and equity across an organization. But the single most important thing, I believe, to grow a customer base, retain a customer base, and expand the business that you have with customers, everyone needs to work together with the center being the customer really being at the center. It lifts the thinking up, makes problem solving easier, and there's none of this going on. In fact, our senior leader at the time, if we were having a serious issue, the guideline or the law of the land was, you first go talk to your colleague about what's happening. And if and when you need to bring that to me, I want the 2 or 3 of you to have several solutions that you've developed. That was very developmental. Very, very, very interesting points. Let's see on the audience side again, and I'm going to look at Grace here, who's behind the camera for everybody. Grace is sitting behind the camera over there. Grace, what's our third question, I guess, from the audience?
The third question is, how do we navigate meeting customer expectations and creating great client experiences when there are internal departmental obstacles that hinder how quickly and accurately we can meet clients' needs? Not all departments operate with the same efficiency or care for various reasons, which can create friction that we don't always have the ability to fix in our role.
Great question, kind of right on the heels of what we're talking about.
It truly is, and that is the reality of day-to-day work and business in a company. But to me, there is the transformational nature around thinking. How do we make it incrementally better? Number one, always setting the right expectation with the customer. I don't know, I grew up in the world with it can't always be yes, but it's never no. And I think when you think about leadership and the world of possibility, I truly believe, you'll ask me a question, I'm sure, in a little while, what I would want to do again. I've always liked to do hard things, but you can't do hard things alone. There was no problem that I solved that was big and worth solving that I did alone, ever. I needed to bring in all of those functional areas and all of my colleagues to help. So I'd looked for incremental improvements and really get engagement. And as you're bringing people together, once again, don't forget to bring in people that are closest to the customer for their perspective. Get in a room, throw titles out the door. There will be aha moments if everyone's listening. And you'll come up with maybe a solution or a beautiful idea that you hadn't thought of before.
Great points as far as that multifunctional nature again, and bringing everybody into a room and just being in a room together, really, to think about the customer as the center, as you were describing there. So in your view, why do so many companies struggle to create a robust and dependable customer experience for their clients?
I think that last question and this, in a way, in my mind, are linked together. I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish. Like, there are real obstacles, and there's a little something called politics in a company. But sometimes you need to almost put that aside and get real about what you're trying to solve. It's not always easy. It does sometimes take a bit of courage and willing to take a risk or step out of the functional box that you believe you're defined to. But I think companies that survive over periods of time have gotten good at the nuances. We started out with discussions around development, constantly expanding the brand of leadership that you need and want in a company is a good way to do that. But it takes courage. And then it does take those rare leaders that can see the dynamic of what's happening and recognize that and make a big deal of it. Even if the effort that's putting in place, I won't say fails, but didn't exactly get the result, moving it in a positive direction is also good. But whatever we do in an operation or across a company, we need to do together.
Interesting point. You mentioned a transformational, of course, a number of times, but you also mentioned incremental a number of times. In the way, when I listen to you, it sounds like they're the same thing in a way. Is that, or at least the one needs the other? Or how do I best understand that?
Well, that's a great point. I think how do you get inertia? To sit and analyze or contemplate and to not take action, to me, is a failure of leadership. Now, how you take that action, how you move forward, who you involve and you engage, also very, very critical. But to me, it's, maybe the problem is very big. That's what I mean by inertia. In the world of incremental, in the world of possibility, to get to that end, you've got to create, maybe it's a small change at first. You get the ball rolling, like the flywheel going. And then people get excited about it. You celebrate along the way. And here's where I think you surprise yourself in the end. That obstacle that may have seemed so large at first, you get to the end of the year and wow, you knocked that out of the park and exceeded what you thought you were going to do.
That's a great point. So I guess the false tension between transformational big things and incremental steps is that they really work hand in hand. You can't get the big thing without taking steps, and you need the steps to go somewhere, I guess. So that interesting point. Let's actually go to the audience again. Grace, our next audience question, please.
The next question from the audience is, we are having trouble balancing transformation with the day-to-day. Can you please talk about that?
Right on cue. So the day-to-day, while we are transforming, we still have things to do as far as just our day jobs, right? And how we balance that.
I think of that as being two-headed. And as a leader, watching the day-to-day, it's the world of task, the world of managing, the world of day-to-day people management. The second part of that head is the vision piece. And here's where you're motivating and getting people excited. So as the leader, yes, we're managing in the day-to-day, but we're also leading to the future that we know we need to create. So honestly, that's how I think about it. It's very much a two-headed kind of process. And both are critical. You know, someone that lives in that world of vision but can't galvanize a team to get there, that's a missing component as well. So I have always been drawn to leaders with a very strong vision. But what's the most important thing that a leader needs? Followers. So you've got to be able to bring people along. And a lot of that is getting very, very good at the day-to-day management.
That's a very good point. Yes, you can't be a leader if no one is following. You're just a lonely walker along some trail if you're not having the followers. Very, very true. We are certainly times are always interesting, but we're certainly in an interesting time in services with what's happening in the AI side, ChatGPT, and discussions around how is it going to change everything or nothing, or whatever people's flavors are. So from your experience in many years at Cox and before, you've certainly seen big new things come in regularly that are changing things or changing everything. In your view, what is next? Where are we in the evolution of services, and what is next?
Again, I think it starts with knowing the customer, the different segments, and how they think about what's next. But there's something around the dialogue around technology as well. You have an internal employee base that I would hope that every person on our front line would react, a new technology, tell me more. How is it going to improve the life of the customer? And really spending the time and investing in the communication to help every person in the organization know what that technology is going to enable. It debunks what will show up in the media as jobs are going away. It helps people to embrace technology as opposed to viewing it possibly as a threat.
That's kind of both let the customer lead and the employee lead in a way. That's kind of what I hear as far as technology, whether it was going back ways, whether it was when you started, we had to do everything by hand. You were talking about how you had to calculate everything by hand. Then computer took part of that. Then we've got Travelocity within seconds. You get the routing, all those things.
Yes.
But also depends on both the customer and the employee, and how you can't move forward without taking both of those with you. That's very, very interesting.
Very
point.
well said.
I try.
Awesome.
Every once in a while, something sticks from my teaching, and I try to figure out how things fit together. And so our the Center for Service Leadership, our approach is always to bring people together, networking within the industry members that we have, but also within the academic members we have and across. So one thing I'd maybe like to ask you is what message you have for service executives. What are some things to look out for, pitfalls, tips and tricks, things they collectively want to work on? What is your thought from your experience? What are things that often just fall by the wayside, maybe that you'd wish that you could or executives could spend more time on, things like that?
Advice. I'll start with me. I kept on my desktop a small piece of paper. It was actually bright pink. And I had one word on it because for the last 10 years of my career, I needed to constantly remind myself to listen. Mm. We're all incredibly busy, possibly traveling, you're doing things online, and sometimes being there in the moment with someone and being with that person to really hear them, honor them, value, but most important, hear what they're really telling you, has so many benefits. That right at the top of the list. And to listen, I think we call it actively, without formulating how you then respond to that person and the idea that they are telling you about. Really just to absorb. People that I interacted with, they knew I would always have, whether it was online, I'd always have a piece of paper and a pen. And I asked them if it was okay. I said, what you're going to tell me about the business today, I want to make sure that I can follow up on and that I'm really hearing you. And I promise you that the commitment I'm making, I'll close the loop with you. So if you have ideas to share with me, but I think far too often we don't listen as well as we need to.
That's great advice. And in any profession, listening.
Yeah.
Listening and more listening. That's great. Now as I mentioned, we have the industry members, we have academic members, a great group of faculty network members worldwide doing research on all kinds of wonderful service topics. So maybe a chance for you to send a message to our academic listeners. Looking ahead, what are topics that you believe academics should devote time to going forward? Things they should figure out for you in industry?
I think often some of the things that I've gotten engaged with here at the center as well, and we've had this wonderful opportunity to interact with MBA students from time to time on different topics. And I think we're always sort of drawn to the operating statement, the finance aspects, the process aspects, certainly from the marketing component, how the pieces all interact together. Sometimes, not that it's overlooked, I think post-pandemic, the people piece. Mm-hmm. It was like music to my ears the last couple of years at the center. Inclusion, diversity, equity, social responsibility across a company. How important those things really are. If you're going to attract the best talent, right out of the mouths of our MBA students, I want to be with a company that values my contribution and will develop me over time. It was really great to hear. So I would say, always balancing the employee piece, the customer piece, and the financial ROI. Those three things, supported by technology and process, all work together but need to be balanced.
Very, very good. We in our research and services, we try to not stray too far from the notion that it's often a people business. Services often is a people business, if not all of it as well. But we certainly in our research sometimes forget it or leave it out too much. So it's certainly something to keep in mind for our academic listeners. Then maybe some things that, again, we're on the center side, we bring together the industry and the faculty, and we have great research from faculty that may not get enough knowledge and or distribution among industry as well. So sometimes that happens too. Is there something that maybe you have seen from the research or academic side that you thought, oh, more businesses should know about it?
Oh, certainly the customer rage study was something that is widely shared. But, I've always appreciated how the areas of research trending around social responsibility and the impact that has on the business. Community involvement is a piece of that as well. But how the center works with the business community to say, okay, very simply, what are you struggling with within your own companies? And we come together as a group, and of course you're always thinking about how much do you share. Mm-hmm. But the open environment, and it's almost like a think tank kind of deal, how the center picks up on those trends and then runs with them, I think is the beauty and the value add that is shared. So again, it's listening, isn't it?
Right. So that's definitely making the time, making the space.
Yeah.
Something we always try to do and find ways of making space in different formats, like the one we have right now, where we have a wonderful chance to just talk to one of the wonderful leaders that we know in the center, and talk to somebody for a little bit longer time, and just have that space as well, allowing for me to listen and learn as well. Thank you for that. So I would like to ask you, what are your plans for your future? What do you do next?
Well, I mentioned before that I like to do hard things. I'm not sure that I do it quite like this again, but I stepped away from full-time work. I think that's called retirement. I think of it as rewirement because I read a book, Don't Retire, Rewire, which was excellent, by the way, and gave a lot of thoughts. But we also chose to move at the same time. So we have our house on the market. We have moved about an hour north of the Phoenix area, a lovely community called Payson. But for the past 5 to 6 weeks, been doing nothing but opening boxes. I've never worked so hard in my life. So taking on those two things at the same time, I cannot tell you what it honestly feels like. In fact, we spoke recently, and it was one of my more harried days where there were people working and things getting delivered. And so I am looking forward to getting past that. Again, that world of possibility. And then my plans for the future, I set a goal for myself that I want to read more. Name a business periodical. I've, of course, yes, we're going to read this. I'll read it cover to cover. But being able to select what I read that really interests me, and that's something that I'm staying true to. Right. Beyond that, I have not made any commitments right now.
That's good. Well, we'll hopefully be able to bring you back to the center on a regular basis as well. At the end of our series for the Conversation With series, I always ask the same 3 questions. And I think you already alluded to that. You were expecting those to come at the end. They're the 3 ifs. I call them the 3 ifs. The first one of those is, if I could relive something from my career, it would be.
If I could relive, when I think about those hard things, whether it were launching a platinum card at American Express, probably the more current experience was reliving how at the beginning of the pandemic, we needed to take 1,500 service personnel, and in a matter, it was actually 10 days to 2 weeks, have everyone pick up their equipment and begin to domicile and work from home. Very easy. Okay, pick up your stuff and go. But we all know that it's a lot more complicated than that from a technology perspective, from a morale perspective, and then keeping them connected to the information that they needed to serve customers. That was the most recent one. And not that I want to relive the pandemic at all, but that was a hard thing to do. But as we did it, incrementally, we improved all of those processes over time. And look what we wound up with, a new model for work around how to help people balance their lives and their work responsibilities, how to improve the customer experience with less turnover. So it's those kinds of experience that I would, because there was a rush at the end of it.
Yes.
We got that done. And you know what? We did it together as a national organization.
Great example. The second if is, if I could change something from my career, it would be?
There was a moment in time, it was when I was working in New York, I was always the customer service operations person that stood in awe of the marketing organization. I still am today. Because growing up at American Express, it was absolutely clear to everyone that American Express is a marketing organization that focuses on customer experience. And I learned a lot about the different components, but marketing was the umbrella. And I had a chance in my career to transition into a marketing role and chose, for given reasons, not to do that. And then made the decision to leave the business that I was in to come out to work in the corporate card area here in Phoenix. I don't regret the decision that I made, but I do regret the process that I went through to make that decision. I was risk adverse. I felt like I needed to know more. I needed to be living within the marketing organization to transition. And a very wise leader had a discussion with me that said, Lee, you're never going to learn and never going to grow if you expect to know 75 or 80% of that job moving into it. But really, that said, believe in yourself. Don't come from the space of less than. Come from the place of contribution.
Great, thank you. My third if and final if I had a magic wand, I would.
I know you love that question. Magic wand to me is, your wish. I thought about that question long and hard. And it brought me to a place of what I think about a lot these days as, a recent retiree. I listen to the media, the news, absolutely everything. Hard to not be, this is not a political discussion that we're having today, but it's hard to ignore what's happening across the company. If I had a magic wand, I would challenge academic leadership and business leadership to come together, again, within that world of magic and possibility, to influence the kind of a world that we're creating across the board. I think there's more that can be leveraged in this country and around the world. So it was hard for me to think about that without putting my world citizenship hat on. You want things to be better. How do we do that? How do we get out of this mire that we've created? Rise up, that's transformation. Raise up the thinking. And I do think we have amazing leaders within business and the academic world that could influence more. That's my magic wand.
Great answers. I use the same 3 ifs every time, so people are now forewarned when they come in. I want to close by, first of all, thanking you, Lee, for joining me on our webinar here. Really appreciate you taking the time.
It was my honor.
And I want to thank the audience, for the questions and for joining us on the webinar. Thank you also, Grace, for managing the questions as they came in. I hope to see you all soon at one of the next events of the center, and have a great rest of your day and week.